Before we officially start, both Joanna and I are a little bit, we feel a little bit awkward being way up here, but we know that it'll help with the voice projection, and it will also help those who are listening on the webcast. So we just thought we'd like to say we feel funny being this high. So maybe will you tell me when to officially start, and I'll do that.
We're going.
Great. Well, welcome to all who are gathered in this room and to all who are gathering in offices and homes to listen to this webcast. We've gathered for this very important conversation and listening how we can prevent sexual exploitation of Indigenous girls and women and how we do that together as a community. We have a special welcome to the family of Rachel Quinney, who have traveled from northeastern Alberta, St. Paul area this morning to be with us. We chose to have this presentation at Norquest because we have a very special relationship with Norquest in the community. Rachel's life was stolen from her in 2004 and stolen from her family when she was brutally murdered. And then out of that came a chance to get to work with the family and to invite community, whether philanthropists or individual donors or the Edmonton Police Service, to help us start a bursary at Norquest, which we called Rachel's Hope. So because Rachel had shared with her family that she hoped to go to Norquest in September of 2004 before her life was stolen. And so many people have contributed to this bursary since 2006 and offered that support to women to achieve their goals. Before I go a little bit further, I would like to invite Logan Gladue to come and offer a land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that we are in Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. And now I would like to welcome up my amazing, dazzling mom, Joanna Gladue.
Thank you, Logan. And she is an amazing mom, and you're an amazing son. And I think this gives us hope to see our young men participating in healing and in breaking the cycles of abuse and exploitation that some men, not all men, but some men do perpetrate on others. So thank you for being such an inspiration. You'll see before you orange. The Sexual Exploitation Working Group of Edmonton is a leadership group in our community, and we create learning opportunities such as this. We have chosen the color orange because many in human trafficking, anti-human trafficking movements around the world choose that color, and also it combines the warmth and compassion of yellow and then the fire and anger of red that we feel when we see injustice. And it comes together in this lovely orange. Some of us are also wearing red today in solidarity with all the red dress movements around Canada, as we call to our collective attention the murdered and missing Indigenous people across our country. We also always light a candle to remember all those whose lives were stolen, whether it was through murder or suicide or addictions or illness due to the trauma of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. The Sexual Exploitation Working Group members are ACT Alberta, Alberta Health Services, Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society, CEASE, Centre to End All Sexual Exploitation, Culture, Multiculturalism and Status of Women Alberta, Edmonton Region Children's Services, the protection of sexually exploited children, Edmonton Fetal Alcohol Network. We have a City of Edmonton Council liaison and staff from Citizen Services, the Edmonton Police Service, the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Unit, Reach Edmonton, Council for Safe Communities, Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton. And now to echo Logan, it's a great honor to introduce Joanna Gladue. We've been working together for, I don't know, well over a year. She has been in the therapeutic and healing environment since 2004, working primarily with adults and adolescents. And then she went to get her master's in counseling psychology. She believes in a strengths-based approach that is holistic, eclectic, and guided by the individual needs of the client. She counsels clients at CEASE and at SACE. She graduated with her master's in counseling from City University, and her capstone project formed the basis of her presentation today, Preventing the Sexual Exploitation of Indigenous Girls and Women. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you so much. As having a wonderful introduction from my son and to a woman who I admire and respect so much, so thank you for that. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the Quinney family for being here. It is my honor to share my presentation and to have your family present, so thank you. So as Kate said, this topic is one that I worked on for my capstone for my school, but it is one that is definitely much more personal to me. I know some individuals professionally and personally who are now on the Murdered Missing Indigenous Women database. And so that, of course, was my inspiration in wanting to do something. So when I started this project, I started to think, let's look at all of the organizations and programs that are supporting those individuals that are being exploited in Canada. And I had a very hard time finding any that focused more so on prevention. Lots of support, lots of awareness campaigns, which are wonderful, which are definitely needed, but not a lot in terms of prevention. Because for me, I think we shouldn't even have to have this problem in Canada. Like, we should be working more so on how are we going to stop it. Like, it's just not acceptable anymore. So that was my reason for choosing this topic. And then as well, thinking of my own kids. I have a son and I have a daughter. And as a young single mom, I am talking to her about, this is what you need to do to take care of yourself. You need to watch yourself. You need to, honor yourself, honor your body, honor your spirit, and all of these teachings and values that I was giving to her. And then I realized, in having a son after, like, it's not just about educating our women, our girls. It's about educating our men and other people. So our girls don't always have to be watching themselves. And why is always the focus on them? So that's more so when I started to research programs that were geared towards men and young Indigenous boys. Sadly, there are not a lot in Canada. Lots focused on women, lots focused on girls, but not a lot on the men's role. So that was kind of the background as to how I started. So I will get started on my presentation now. Thank you. So I'm sure we all know the stats on murdered and missing Indigenous women in Canada, so I am not going to be focusing a lot on that, but these are just some of the stats that we have with an RCMP report. So, obviously Indigenous women are at a higher risk for all forms of violence and abuse. And yes, while there are, a high number that are known to the Indigenous women and girls, there is still a high number that are unknown, that are strangers. So, and regardless to who the perpetrator is, again, that should not be the focus. The focus is on, why is this happening? And how are we going to stop it? And, when you think about the statistics of how few Indigenous women there are in our Canadian population, yet they account for so many of the homicides across our country, that alone is very alarming. So, research findings on murdered and missing Indigenous women and what has contributed to it. We all have heard the historical influence of colonization, the disruption of cultural identity, the patriarchal values that have brought on to devalue Indigenous women, having to assimilate to the Western mainstream society, and then lots of the family values, the attachments, the relationships, the identity, all of that encapsulated to the problem. So I just did a little diagram on the impact of colonization because it is not just individually impacted. Of course, individually, anyone who has their culture torn apart from them, who is made to feel less than on a day-to-day basis, that does take a toll on your self-esteem, your identity, your self-worth. So individually, you have that impact of not feeling good enough. And then if you look moving more into the family, the relationships, the attachments, that is all going to be impacted as well. And then all of the historical teachings, the values, the belief system, things that defined Indigenous cultures and families, a lot of that were lost. Moms had their kids taken away from them. They lost their identity as a mom. Fathers, being providers, lost their role in the family, that sense of pride, that sense of accomplishment in contributing to the family and to their community. And then, of course, going on into the community, the impacts, the breakdown of that support, that collaborative way of life that was for Indigenous people prior to colonization. And then the trickle effect into society and to how society views Indigenous peoples. And then, of course, there's the elements of racism, sexism, and classism. So again, I'm not going to go too much into this, but just to give you an idea of how colonization is deep-rooted. So I'm sure we've all seen the headlines, the marches, all of the events that we have for murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls. I myself have been involved in supporting these events. And yes, while they are definitely, well needed, we need to have the awareness, but it would be, nice to not have to have these kind of campaigns. Unfortunately, sometimes a negative connotation can come with these campaigns, and the media likes to highlight, sometimes the negative parts of an individual's life or the way that they're portrayed. And really, at the end of the day, those factors shouldn't matter. All the stereotypes that we have, and that ideology that every murdered, missing Indigenous woman and girl, well, she's in the sex trade, it's her life, it's, her broken family, when that's not actually always the case. But that's the way that media likes to portray murdered, missing Indigenous women. So the project that I worked on, I did a lit review, and again, as I was talking earlier, all the research topics, my ideas, I researched and came to 4 main findings. And these are findings that are focused on prevention. So I researched a whole bunch of different programs, studies that were done all across Canada, and these were the 4 main themes that came up in terms of preventive strategies. So the first one being familial relations, roles and attachments, community capacity building and self-determination, decolonization and cultural revitalization, and lastly, experiential narratives. So when you think about, like, I guess in terms of the first one, familial relations, that is focused more so on when I was talking about the individual and families, that loss of attachments, that loss of sense of collaborative way of life, and really being cognizant that Indigenous families are very close. Like, kinship is something that is very important. And so in terms of prevention, focusing on the family, focusing on those relationships is very important. And looking more so, I guess, into what the findings show for, you know, how we can work towards preventative ways in terms of one-on-one work in clinical practice. So being very aware that families can be a part of the healing process and should be if they are available. I know sometimes with the work that I do as a therapist, sometimes there's not the healthy families and support to, you know, try to collaborate when I'm making up a treatment plan for a client, but, you know, being creative and trying to find ways. And so maybe not just limiting family supports to biological, but there's extended family, you know, and so it doesn't have to be a blood relative necessarily to be family. And so trying to work with, you know, that individual in a supportive environment and trying to connect and involve families and understanding that that value is there. And also not being judgmental in terms of which family they identify as their mother or father, because I know even for myself as an Indigenous person, I consider my aunts, you know, to be my second moms. And so sometimes if mom's not available for your client, maybe it's relying on an aunt or a cousin. So trauma is intergenerational. And so again, that's another good reason to involve the family, because healing has to take place not just with the individual, but with the family as well. And that is not just to say that preventative work needs to be focused on, you know, just making people aware of like what not to do so your kids are not going to be, you know, victimized or targeted. It's recognizing that it's sometimes breaking that cycle. And so treatment with the perpetrators is something that would be very important to breaking intergenerational trauma. And that way, if you're a clinician, you know, if it's at all possible, being aware that, you know, the perpetrator and a family might and could also be part of the healing. Because if we are going to try to end intergenerational trauma, we need to work with those that are already offending, that have offended, and trying to find ways to support them. So building capacity was one of the other main areas that I found. So working within the community, and, you know, and when I say community, it doesn't have to be like specifically a small community. It could be the community of Edmonton. So rural, urban, doesn't matter, but just trying to find out, you know, what supports and services are there, and ways that, you know, you can work together with the services and those providers that are already providing supports. Because for a clinician, you know, you can't just work on the assumption that, you know, you're going to be the only person involved in healing this trauma. that it's going to take more than one person. And so relying on those other connections that are already in the community. So yeah, and that could also even just be elders. It could be chief and council if you're working on a reserve. Just anyone that you know has that same ideology of prevention, of supports. And then another main area was decolonization. And so that's revitalizing the Indigenous culture and, you know, trying to rely on traditional methods, spirituality, values, and any ways that were traditionally used, especially in terms with families and attachment, and relying on that holistic approach. So the holistic approach, you know, of course, is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And so in terms of, I guess some of, for myself, when I think about the work that I've done with girls, the topics that I focused on, you know, so just to be aware of if you are going to be doing any kind of work with Indigenous populations, so self-esteem, self-worth, identity, sexuality, providing psychoeducation on relationships, intergenerational trauma, because I've actually worked with some families that, you know, either don't know much about their history due to being separated from their families, so they don't really know a lot about intergenerational trauma. And when I've brought that up to some of my clients, they're actually, like, I have to kind of give them that, you know, the history of Canada, because they don't really know a lot about what happened. Providing resources to the community, because again, working from that holistic approach that, you know, you're not the only person that's going to be supporting. So for staff, working with these populations, having culturally competent training workshops that are available, that are designed and facilitated by Indigenous people, having some input and consultation with those that work with those that have been sexually exploited, and or either those have or are out of that life. So having input is very important. And so one of the things that I actually designed a program which for clinicians, but there's obviously not time today to talk about all of that. But one of the things in my workshop is that, you know, giving some clinicians and frontline workers exploitation warning signs in your clients or in your students in the school. So one of the things that I've noticed in my work is maybe the appearance of, you know, the people that the girls that you're working with. So I would be aware if suddenly, you know, my client comes in, she's very, you know, low socioeconomic status, comes in with brand new cell phone, nails done, new outfit, new shoes, brand name purse. Those are some of the things that I've watched out for, talking about a boyfriend, an older boyfriend, that could possibly be somebody that is exploiting them. Just so topics like that. But again, unfortunately today we don't have enough time to show all of my workshop ideas, but maybe I'll have to do another one for that. So again, and so back to the office itself, having Indigenous staff, if possible, a waiting room and an environment that is welcoming to Indigenous families. And, you know, and I know there are some agencies that are working really hard to try to, you know, find ways to have Indigenous populations access their agency. And so consultation, I think, is very important. And, you know, not just putting up a picture of an Indigenous art and then just think, you know, okay, you know, this is it. We're welcoming, you know, it's much more than that. It's relationship, it's building trust within the community. So for recommendations for prevention for programming, again, holistic. So thinking of the medicine wheel, that balance. Focusing on the relationships, so families and community can be involved. And also making sure that it's gender inclusive. And then as I said before, you know, it's while empowering women programs in the community are great, it is, you know, we can't just assume that, you know, even for me as a mom, telling my daughter to, like, these are all the ways to prevent yourself from being exploited or trafficked. That is actually my responsibility as a mom to ensure that I am educating my young son and other young boys and other men that I come into contact that it's not okay. And that having those supports for our men that need that healing as well. And I'm actually happy to see in Edmonton there are actually just new recently a couple of men's programs that were started, you know, to begin that healing. I think that is so important. So again, in terms of programming, designing, and how to begin one with your agency, consultation, very important. Having the experiential voices, those, you know, that have been sexually exploited, maybe those that have exited, finding out ways in which, you know, what were factors that led them to be susceptible to exploitation, and what factors supported them in exiting, and how have they maintained that. Because, you know, hearing those voices, hearing that stories is so important, those narratives, and having them share, so empowering for them as well in terms of their own healing. And the locations where these programs, again, so, you know, it could be any of your agencies here in the city that provide, you know, some sort of programming, but making sure that you do have that consultation, Indigenous elders, having that respect, the relationships. But doesn't only have to take place in an agency. Actually, one of the programs that I designed was for one that can be implemented in a school. I think schools are great both for urban and rural, especially in Indigenous communities, because for myself, I know that in my own community, schools are used a lot. And so using them as a hub for preventative programming, you can also involve the families and community, and it's very accessible. The workshops could also be held online if possible, like more so of the psychoeducation, you know, keeping parents in terms enlightened of, you know, cybernet, you know, like, because that's something that's not really talked about is the impact of the internet in terms of exploitation. Lots of my clients, the women and young girls, will tell me that, you know, even the online dating apps, that's a very high way to exploit young girls. You know, now there's, you know, and any age can get on those apps. You don't need anything. You don't need a credit card. It's, you know, this ideology of, you know, our kids walking down the street and someone's driving by and is going to exploit them and pick them up, and that doesn't really happen anymore. It's all like internet, hanging out at the mall. And it's very unfortunate that I've actually talked to some of the parents, the kids that I've worked with, and they're just shocked. They had no idea. Online dating and all those apps, games even, doesn't even have to be the online dating. And for Indigenous, you know, young people from communities coming to Edmonton, that's like an easy way to get targeted. And then as well, another way to get targeted into gangs. Gangs is another connection to exploitation, which definitely needs more research, which actually hopefully that's going to be my next topic is figuring out how to make that connection. But you know, the programming doesn't only have to be about like warning of exploitation. It can be positive for both the boys and the girls, that the youth, you know, giving them hope, giving them goals, giving them dreams, you know, that, you know, you don't have to be a target. You don't have to always be watching yourself, that, you know, you can make a difference. You can have a positive life. And, you know, so when I hear about, the program that we have at CEAS, you know, Rachel's Hope Bursary, you know, those are the type of programs we need more of. That education, skills, you know, for both, for men and women, because the socioeconomic issue is one of the main reasons why women get into exploitation, because, you know, also the family, intergenerational, but in terms of finances, you know, and if that's the only way that you can provide for your kids, that, you know, it's really sad. So having supports for that, I think, would be a really good way to prevent, and, you know, prevent the woman, but then also prevent future generations. Because as I've seen, I've worked with the kids, and then I've found out their aunts were also involved, and then grandma, other cousins. So if we can try to break that off as soon as we can with education, I think that's very important in breaking that cycle. So recommendations and policy level. Again, relationships, consultation with those agencies in the community that are already doing, you know, prevention work. And as you can see, I put a picture of Kate on the PowerPoint and SEWG, so, and Kathy King. But, you know, trying to connect with those communities, organizations that we already have in the city, and not just here, but in other cities, Calgary. I've also worked in Winnipeg with a program that focused on young girls that were sexually exploited. And so trying to, you know, if you're trying to look at prevention, it's like, what are the gaps in services in the community? And having those conversations and dialogue, like the experiential voices, those professional organizations need to definitely be invited to those conversations, along with, you know, the government officials, those people that are going to be making the policies. And, you know, making sure that, you know, it's not just, you know, a one-year program or a two-year program, that there's actually long-term benefits in place, because, you know, it's an intergenerational issue, and it's going to take, you know, a few generations to try to abolish this, so that we don't have to worry about our Indigenous women and girls being exploited. And that is it. One last slide. So gaps in research. So I'm not going to go, this was just more so for my own assignment, but something, I think the main thing that I would like to just point out is that something that I could not find in the research was research that is being done on healthy, functioning, role model Indigenous people in Canada, because there are a lot that I know. Lots that I'm blessed to work with, my colleagues, and I often wonder, like, why is the research on Indigenous people always so the disparaging, the dismal stats? Like more focus needs to be on what's working with Indigenous families and communities. Like, where's the positive stories? I think learning from those people that have those protective factors in place and finding out, what has kept them going, and, what supports could we put in place, and where are we missing? Like, what is missing for them? So rather than always focusing on, the studies that highlight all the negativity, it's focusing on some of the positives. And I actually saw some positive role models here today. I mean, there's students around us. There's an Indigenous Student Services. So I think future research could be focused on that population and finding out what's working for them. What supports do they have? And now that'll be it. I promise. So this is my contact information. Especially for those people who are not here today and want to get in touch with me in terms of questions. And I can be reached by email is probably better, but that is my cell number. For anyone else who would like to have, I guess, more of a smaller workshop, because this is more so like just to talk about all my topics, but I actually do have some workshops. I actually do have some smaller group activities that I could come into workplaces to do if possible, if so. So feel free to get a hold of me, but I guess that's everything. Yeah.
Thank you, Joanna. sorry, everybody. We now have time for dialogue and questions, and we have this mic, and my friend Katie will try to pass the mic around, but if it's for someone in the far back who has a question, we'll just ask you all to pass the mic to that person. So Joanna and I will try to see who might put their hands up, and Katie will run the mic.
And if there's no questions, that's totally fine.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm a student here at Norquest, and I access the Indigenous Center, and I am also a recipient of the Rachel's Hope bursary. So I'm very honored and blessed to be here, and just grateful to hear that, so much interest is being taken into putting into place some of those preventative measures. And I'd be interested to speak with you. Thank you.
I also want to say thank you. My name is Lacey. I'm a former student here, and I was a recipient of the Rachel's Hope. And I'm now LPN at the Royal Alex. So thank you so much. Okay.
In the back there.
Hi, my name is Lourdes. I just have a question. You mentioned about some initiatives here in Edmonton about engaging men and boys. Could you be able to expand a little bit more on what are those and what's the name of those initiatives, please?
I know of the one, and that is one that Stephanie Harp helped to support. And I heard about that one through a Facebook group. So I believe it's with the IAAW.
Of course.
We do know that there's groups like Men Edmonton who kind of organize around what does it mean to be a healthy male? What are healthy masculinities? And I really celebrate that they are in existence. We know that in some of the immigrant and newcomer communities, there are men gathering in those communities to reflect on, okay, now we're here in Canada. We may have abused and exploited women in our own countries, but now we're here, and this is, we do not want to repeat those patterns from the past. And on that note, I can tell you that CEAS and Reach Edmonton are working with two male leaders within immigrant and refugee communities, and we're holding a workshop on February 27th to train settlement workers who are working with men, and to both educate them about the laws in Canada around exploiting and trying to purchase sex services, as well as on what are the positive ways to be a healthy male in Canada. So those are just a few of the quick ones. I am sure there's more. I know that the Sexual Assault Center does really excellent work, especially reaching out and educating youth in schools. And so I always take courage, because I know they're out there and they're talking about what does informed consent mean? What are healthy relationships? So those are just some of the things I know of quickly in Edmonton. This is a quiet group. Oh, did you have your hand up? Nope. Not for a question. Okay, thanks. I'll say something.
Hi, my name is Darlene. I'm the mother of Lacey. I want to thank Rachel's Hope for getting my daughter where she's at today. Actually, this anniversary saved her life. She was brutally stabbed by an individual. She died twice. And with Rachel's Hope, Lacey found that anniversary online or something, and she was so excited. And it brought her to where she is today. We got her life back. She lived a promiscuous lifestyle when she was younger. But with Rachel's Hope, gave us hope. So I just want to say thank you to all.
Thank you, Lacey and Darlene and Jessica. And when we worked together as a community to start this bursary in 2006, our hope was that it would be like a lighthouse, that women and people of all genders who'd been exploited might see that light and know that the community was supporting them. And the donors over the years have been incredible, whether it was an individual like my mom, or the City of Edmonton Employees Charitable Fund, Aon Reed Stenhouse, philanthropists who gave, I think it was $35,000 a year for 5 years, about 10 years ago. When we created this beacon of hope, the community joined in, and I think that's so hopeful. And that's what we can do. We might be on the fringe, maybe our lives were not directly touched, maybe they were, but we can all help in different ways to create these positive pathways where people can, take their moment in history and heal and rebuild their lives. There's another fund through the Edmonton Community Foundation called the Awinita Fund, and it's specifically for Indigenous women. A Canadian author made a lot of money writing books, and the government wanted her archives, and they paid her a big sum of money for the archives. So she came to the Edmonton Community Foundation and said, I want to reinvest this to help Indigenous women. And so she established the Awinita Fund through the Community Foundation, and we worked with CEAS to allocate those funds. The Community Foundation also mobilizes money through some of the independent family funds. So maybe one year we'll get $1,500 from such and such family, and they want us to use it for bursaries. Or the bigger Eldon and Ann Foot Fund, we receive $30,000 a year that we are able to use for bursaries for people who aren't going to, say, Norquest or a university or a college, but who, you know, maybe a $2,500 bursary is going to help them on their way in a different kind of community course. So this is, I think this is a strength that Joanna was talking about how community can participate and support people on their pathways. Maybe this is the moment I could ask Rachel's aunt to read a poem that, was it her cousin who wrote the poem? My son. Your son who wrote this poem.
The sisters here. My son wrote this poem for Rachel. He writes, in loving memory of Rachel Quinney. The memories still live on, even though you are gone. Your humor and love still falls from your home above. The smile you always show warms our heart and makes our heart love grow. The days won't stop when our tears drop, but all the words you spoke to us remind us that going on is a must. You show us how to really live by all the love and memories you gave. The sun always shines when we look into your eyes. Even though you are not here, your words of love and laughter we still hear. We won't stop until it's done, until all your dreams are sung. We want your dreams to live on. We want every picture drawn until the masterpiece of Rachel takes shape. We won't stop. We'll do everything to make your dreams a reality.
Might there be other questions or experiences or comments? We know we have a great number of people in this room who are actively involved in supporting in one way or another. I think that's something that Joanna mentioned, and I think it's important that those those who are accompanying people be invited in, giving their experiences to policymakers and program designers. So if there's anyone who feels like they would like to speak from what they're doing now, that would be welcome. We have a little bit more time.
Well, I have a little bit of a political statement, and please stop me if you think this isn't the most appropriate place to say it, but I think it's so important to hear the men who are supporting us. This ties in with what you said. And one of the things that has made me very, very sad over the last couple of days is this member of parliament who gave a very impassioned speech in parliament about the value of women and the sacredness of women and the fact that women in Canada were not for sale and women in Canada deserve better. And he was speaking in response to a lady who was trying to say that Canada should make the sex trade safer. And then he gave this impassioned speech on behalf of women of Canada deserve better. And then he made the mistake of saying, would you consider sexual service or something like that? And that was, the media picked up on that last little statement and demanded that he apologize to this woman, and she has taken it and run with it. And hundreds of women around Edmonton have taken that last little bit of it and condemned him for asking this woman how it would impact her, which the question, he probably could have asked the question better, but the question was taken totally out of context. And I've been defending him on Facebook for the last 2 days, and I just think how we have to be so careful not to miss the men who are standing up for women of Canada. And so if anybody has responded to that, I would just ask that you look at the big picture and look at what was really being said, because I actually copied this guy's speech. If anybody wants to hear it, it's 3 pages. It is a very good speech, and it was just taken so out of context, and I just feel he was discredited where he should have been credited, and I would just like to find a way of turning that around if possible. Yeah, I can read it if you want. Okay, thank you. I think we won't take time to read it right now. And I do remember that I forgot one other important support for men in our city. It's the men's groups and Men's Without Hats that are city male staff workers and male volunteers in the community do pull together to support men, whether they're working through relationship challenges or unemployment or low self-esteem. And I think, again, directing men to the positives that are there in the community will be really helpful. I think this means that we are ready to conclude. A few of us will be around here for a few minutes. Some of us are going to go into the Indigenous Center into their lovely ceremonial space to have a little private sharing. And I want to say I really commend Norquest working with Indigenous communities to create that space and create the support for students. I wasn't there in 2006, so it's wonderful that it's here today and being well used. So thanks to Norquest for being a leader.